Joining us now from Long Island is Anthony Scaramucci, the former White House communications chief and informal Trump advisor. And look, President Trump and John McCain obviously had a very contentious relationship, but let's put that aside on this day. McCain's style, I was talking about a moment ago, of working with Democrats, sometimes taking on Republicans, including George W. Bush, having these shifting alliances. Is that now a vestige of a bygone era because things are so brutally partisan and polarized?
I certainly hope not, Howie. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to come back to that. And so it feels like the pendulum in our political society has split in both directions rather than swinging back into the middle. And so hopefully, as people are giving tributes to the senator, they'll think about that and they'll think about ways of bridging the gaps now, because it really should be about what's the right policies for the United States. It's a right or wrong decision as opposed to left or right. But one of the things I want to mention, which I haven't seen, is last night I was looking at the detailed information of the Hanoi Hilton to really understand the struggle, the 5.5-year struggle that John McCain had. I encourage people to look at that because in addition to so many other things, he is a role model of perseverance at a time in trial where he didn't know if he was going to get out alive. And he came out of there with an unbelievable sense of optimism and love of country. Never disavowed the war or the mission. And this is a guy that I have to tell you, when I've had my rough moments in life, I think about him and what he struggled with. And he's a force of optimism. And his life, which will be remembered forever in America because he's one of those types of senators, that Henry Clay-like figure, he will be somebody that we look to for years to come, Howard.
Right. I think that experience did set him apart in many ways. But he would give it to anybody. I'm reminded that 5 years ago in a battle over a filibuster, he called Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, members of his own party, wacko birds. But it's interesting to look at the full quote. It's always the wacko birds on the right and left that get the media microphone, said John McCain, who, by the way, enjoyed the media microphone. All right, let's talk a little bit about President Trump, who you work for and who you are in contact with. By any reasonable standard, this was what Drudge called a hell week for the president. You had the reporting and commentary on the Michael Cohen plea, the Paul Manafort conviction, David Pecker of the National Enquirer getting an immunity deal, all these investigations and pleas and deals. Do you think the coverage, which has portrayed this as a very, very bad week, has been largely fair or unfair to the president?
Well, listen, I mean, I've looked through this. I would say most of the coverage, unfortunately, is always a little bit unfair to this president. But when I look at the coverage and I think about the facts, I just want to state a couple of things. Number one, the president has never been told by anybody that he's a target of any investigation. Mm-hmm. Number two, Alan Dershowitz, my former law school professor, would share this. There's nothing on the table right now, if you're unpeeling that onion of facts, that looks like anything illegal for the President of the United States. And then the last point that I would make is the one I certainly feel very bad about. I think it's got to be emotionally upsetting to the President to see guys that he was very, very close to either go through their trials and tribulations or seek immunity. I think that's something that he's probably emotional about. I mean, at least I know I would be.
Yeah, sure. Who wouldn't be?
But I don't think that we're at the line here of illegality at this point.
I wasn't suggesting that. I was talking about the political and journalistic impact. And let me get to this because
I'm just giving you my objective observation of the situation.
Let me jump in with this because some pundits, like National Review editor Rich Lowry, not a fan of the president, nevertheless wrote this week that Trump's best strategy would be to come clean. And this is according to Lowry and some others. Admit he hasn't been entirely truthful about a couple of affairs that most people assume he probably had, about the payments to silence these women, apologize, and get out of the daily drip, drip, drip of when did you find out about these payments and all of that, and get back to concentrating on issues. Now, needless to say, that is not the president's style, but you're known for giving him tough love. I mean, could that work?
Well, I think that would work, and I would ask the president to go back to some of the passages in President Clinton's book. In his memoir after the presidency, the president said that he made some mistakes with the Monica Lewinsky thing. He needed to have gotten out in front of the truth a lot earlier. I think what ends up happening in a situation like this is your first inclination is to hold back, and so what that does is it causes a bee swarm around you. So I think you're always better off letting everything loose. But, listen, the American people know that the president has had a varied and adventuresome life. The Access Hollywood tape divulged a lot of information to the American people. There was a Surgeon General's warning label on his candidacy related to this stuff. And I know it's a Sunday morning, and I'm not trying to sound, without a church-going experience, but at the end of the day, the American people sort of knew where the president lived on these issues, and I don't really think it matters that much to them. So it would be a good idea, but I think it's very hard for somebody like the president to do that, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's a good, fair assessment. We got about half a minute. A lot of commentary about the president talking about flipping and how he didn't like the fact that Michael Cohen flipped, but he thought Paul Manafort was brave for not flipping, and maybe flipping should even be illegal. He mused. Some people are saying, this is sort of like mob talk. Unfair assessment, or would you just assume he's steer away from comments like that?
Well, I think you should steer away from it. I think it's unfair in the sense that, of course, that would never happen, but that is President Trump. That's the person that people really love, Howie, because he wears all that stuff on his sleeve. When I saw that interview, I saw the emotion in him and the hurt that people were sort of turning against him, and he's fearful that people are going to tell lies about him to get a reduced sentence for themselves. But I certainly don't think he wants to go in the direction of making, quote unquote, flipping illegal.
No.
And I would encourage the president, he controls the news cycle in the bully pulpit, so be more verbally disciplined in an interview like that.
All right, Anthony Scaramucci with your own candid assessment of both of President Trump and of John McCain's career. Thanks very much for joining us from the Southampton Bureau.
Happy Sunday.
Have a great Sunday.
Former Trump campaign advisor Michael Caputo on that. He knows firsthand, was exposed to it, and has a whole lot of legal bills because of it. Michael, good to have you back with us.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Neil.
What do you make of what's being said here and what you're learning? And you know a little bit of maybe having been subjected to it and questioning the Mueller folks and all. Where are they going here? Do you know?
Well, I think, long ago I came to the conclusion that they're not investigating a crime here. They're investigating a man, the president, and trying to find any crime they can in order to bring him down. And I think, as Senator Paul said, it's very clear that this special prosecutor has far more powers than any other prosecutor in the Department of Justice. And they're using those to bring people in, like Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, at this point, I think, would plead guilty to just about anything, no matter what they said, even made-up crimes, just to get a reduction in his prison sentence. And that, to me, is what this system does.
So when you were talking to them, and I know there's some stuff you can't bring up, what were they after? What were they going into?
Oh, they asked me about Michael Cohen. I know Michael, but I didn't know much about what he was up to. They asked me a bit about Paul Manafort and a lot about Roger Stone. I tend to be considered to be closer to Roger than most of the other folks. They asked me if a little bit about other people, but really I didn't get asked much about anyone named Trump. And when it was clear to them that I knew nothing about any kind of Russian collusion, the interview was cut short. We expected to be there about six and a half hours, and we were there for just over 3 hours.
You mentioned Roger Stone. He has been speaking pretty forcefully that he feels he's next, that they're targeting him.
Well, I get that feeling, too. I talk to Roger fairly often. He's a very dear friend of mine. I know he's not involved in any Russian collusion, but I think at this point we're not even looking for Russian collusion anymore over at that special counsel's office.
Yeah, I get that feeling
Roger's
as well,
opinion,
Michael. Others have told
been...
me that the way this is going and the direction in which it's going, it might have completely gone off that track.
It sure seems it. I mean, they were talking about Russian collusion with me, but, that was early May, and that's a lifetime ago in this investigation. Now we hear about a lot more about, peccadillos between the president and porn stars and things like that. And, those are not questions I was asked.
Did any of that stuff come up when you were being questioned?
Not at all. They did ask me, strangely, about some jealous husband in New Jersey in the context of Roger Stone. I didn't know where that was coming from. It seems to me they've gotten really far afield. And Russian collusion, while they probably still believe it, it doesn't look like they're getting any closer to it.
All right, so let's say now you got this immunity deal with the chief financial officer of the Trump organization. Where do you think that is going?
I think it's going just where I thought it was going when they gave Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson immunity in the Clinton email server scandal. We didn't know what that was about when we heard about it, and later on we found out it was rather limited immunity just about their devices. I don't know what these two gentlemen, Mr. Pecker and the CFO from the Trump organization, are cooperating with, but I don't think just because they have immunity, we can expect that they're going to, that they're rolling on the president and creating some kind of a wave of charges against him. I'm willing to sit back and wait. I'm not getting too excited about those immunities.
All right. The Pecker one is the one that gets a lot of attention because apparently the National Enquirer has this vault full of stories and issues that involve Donald Trump going back many, many years. What did you think of that and where they're going with the immunity deal for him?
I don't know. It's very interesting to think that Mr. Pecker's vault would be totally and completely filled with Donald Trump material when National Enquirer covers everyone from space aliens to Hollywood, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. My feeling is, that vault might be interesting. It also might be empty. I don't think that Donald Trump is the only topic Mr. Pecker was covering over there. But, I mean, let's just face it. I mean, in my opinion, Neil, this is really getting completely wrapped around the axle of personal peccadillos. I mean, and in my mind, they were using personal money to address a personal issue that mattered a lot to the president personally. And to me, that doesn't sound like a campaign finance violation.
Well, of course, many prosecutorial investigations have veered off course. We've mentioned many times on this show, I think you and I were chatting about it, the Clinton investigation started on real estate deals and transactions and ended up with the discussion of an intern and address. So stranger things have happened. But this appears to be maybe going in that same sort of off-court way, but it is what it is. Where do you think this goes? The president continues to call it a witch hunt, that he's being treated unfairly. What's your gut read on this?
Well, I think I think you hit it on the head. These special prosecutors, may end up with a vaunted theory of Russian collusion or bank fraud or Whitewater, but they always end up in the president's pants for some reason. I don't understand. They can't find anything, so they go to the personal foibles with interns and porn stars. I think America is rather tired of this, and I think, just as your previous guest said, I don't think that we should be following these kinds of procedures for the next special prosecutor. It may be a little bit too late, as Rand Paul said, but I think this needs to be changed. And I think also at this time, the president is facing a really difficult decision to make, and that is how he's going to clean out Main Justice. Because the folks who were appointed to Main Justice were really trying to stop him from being president, and then nowadays trying to push him out. They've managed to clean out Main Justice somewhat, but the president's got to do more, and that includes, I think, by this time, Attorney General Sessions.
Do you think the president moves to fire him after the midterms?
I don't advise the president. We don't speak, but I got to tell you, if I were to advise the president, I think I'd make an announcement that, demand that all the documents that Congress has requested be returned to Congress unredacted completely, every single thing they ask for. And if Justice doesn't do that, you fire Sessions and give the next person in line 72 hours to do the same thing, and keep firing them until they turn over the documents that are required by congressional oversight authority. I believe there's a lot behind those redacted comments.
But if you were to fire, I understand where you're coming from. I just want to be clear, because another guest had raised this with me. If you were to fire Sessions, let's say with him, Rosenstein, you could have like a Nixon Saturday Night Massacre on your hands, right?
Right, I suppose you could, but we see some senators like Lindsey Graham coming around to the idea that the president deserves to have whatever cabinet secretary he desires. And we also know that Attorney General Sessions has nothing to do with the Mueller investigation at this point. He's made sure of that himself. I'm not quite certain you could paint firing the Attorney General Sessions himself as some kind of a way to commit obstruction on the Mueller investigation. What we need are those documents that they've been hiding and resisting and redacting before they give them to Congress. Congress wants them. They deserve them by law. This is a constitutional requirement. The Department of Justice has got to stop stonewalling, stop keeping this secret, so we can find out exactly what Maine Justice was doing in the run-up to the presidential election to stop Donald Trump.
Michael, good seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
Michael Caputo.